Welcome, everyone. We're going to go ahead and start. We're so happy to have some people in the room, and we have a lot of people in Zoom. So everybody who's on Zoom, please introduce yourselves on chat. I'm actually going to pass the microphone around very quickly to the people in the room so that you can just tell us what organization you're from, and or if you are, and what your name is.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tracy Flor Figueroa. I am the Vista Fellow with Thrive Alliance.
Hi, I'm Annalise Eder, and I'm from the San Mateo County Office of Education.
Jen Wallison, Mayor of Menlo Park.
Chris Bowie, I'm with the American Focus.
Davina Gentry. I'm a green realtor, and I've been involved with San Mateo County Conservation Resource District, and also here on behalf of Sequoia Audubon Society.
My name is Allison Madden. I'm here with San Francisco Bay Marinas for All. We try to preserve and maintain the marinas around the bay for public access and all public trust uses. And I just started also with a nonprofit cleaning plastic out of the ocean. It's Ocean Voyages Institute.
Hi, Valerie Dubois. I have been starting to get involved with the Citizens Climate Lobby and the Climate Reality Project. And one of the first things that anybody says, I live on the coast, is I will energize my house as soon as the grid is reliable. And so that's why I'm here.
Libby Trobman with Elders Action Network. And I also say I'm a kind of a full-time volunteer in San Mateo in my community.
Bob Mitten. I also live on the coast and in Pescadero, and working with Irma and South Coast Sustainable.
Hi, my name's Eileen. I don't belong to any organization, but I'm a glutton for punishment because I fully electrified my house.
And that was a 6-month process, by the way, of her fully electrifying her house. It was not easy. Many years. So I'm Petra Sultan. I'm the Senior Director of Programs for Thrive Alliance. And we're going to do a quick welcome, and then I'm going to introduce one more of our team members in addition to Tracy. And then after that, we will get into the program. So I think most of you know, but Thrive Alliance is the Alliance of Nonprofits for San Mateo County. We have a lot of different programs. Our environment and sustainability is one of them. We have great newsletters. If you're not signed up, please join us. Sorry, I'm going to go back for just a second. We actually have an elected in the room, so it is customary to recognize elected. If we have any electeds on chat, please recognize yourselves on chat. But we have the mayor of Menlo Park here, so she introduced herself, but we should also recognize her. Thank you for coming. And actually, this is the second time I've seen her today, because this morning there was a breakfast that I went to with 600 of my closest friends for an organization called Life Moves, which runs 28 shelters in the 2 counties. And one of the things I took away from that, besides like a lot of mascara that was under my eyes because there was so much crying because people were telling these amazingly emotional stories, but it was really what it was about hope and working together. And I see a lot of the work that we do reflected in that. So I just wanted to kind of bring in the beginning of this conversation, the idea of hope and working together. With that, I want to actually move to our next slide and introduce Anna Mascolta, who is our Director of Community Resilience, to tell you a little bit more about this new initiative from Thrive called Thrive Rise, Resilience in Shared Emergencies, and how it connects to all of the work that we're doing.
Thanks, Petra. Hi, everyone. So that's where I stand. Okay. So my name is Anna Mascolta. I'm the Director of Community Resilience at Thrive Alliance, and I lead the Coalition of Community Organizations Active in Disaster, as we call it, the COAD. And essentially a COAD is something that helps organize and coordinate primarily the nonprofit sector in a specific area to respond and recover from disasters. So we had our work cut out for us this past winter. We also, in addition to response, we do preparedness work. And so part of that is leading trainings to help organizations. They can be faith-based organizations, other types of nonprofits, and sometimes we do get even special districts in the room for these trainings. So this is actually the third one in our series. This will focus on essentially how do you keep your organization running after you experience a shock event. And there are so many things that really unravel during a disaster. So how can we ensure that staff are ready, that your organization, your admin, the fiscal aspects of your organization are all prepared for something like a shock event. So this is going to be a 2-hour virtual training led by Heather Lee from SF Card, essentially my counterpart in San Francisco. And we hope to see you there. If we don't, then maybe you can make the next training. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Anna's been a fantastic addition to our team, and just the work she's doing ties in so strongly with the work that Thrive does in environment and sustainability space, but also just in the community building and coordination between the nonprofits. Look at all those great people who are on. It's nice to see all of you on Zoom. Our next event for environment and sustainability will be focused on trees. And believe it or not, inequities, because there's a lot of things that we don't think about necessarily about canopy cover and how important it is and how unequal it is across the county. But if anybody is unsure of that, take a drive from Atherton over to East Palo Alto and you will see. So this series of environmental sustainability Thrive action groups is actually sponsored by Peninsula Clean Energy. So we totally appreciate their sponsorship. And when we were talking about that, we we're going to do this event, I'm like, but Peninsula Clean Energy isn't really the one who delivers our energy. It's PG&E that delivers it. They're the ones who maintain the grid, but Peninsula Clean Energy is the one who who purchases the energy. So they're the ones who choose to make sure that we are 100% clean energy. One of the things that's super exciting is that Peninsula Clean Energy is modeling how utilities can supply enough renewable power reliably at all times, 24/7. So right now, sometimes you have to switch to non-renewable during peak times, 4 to 9. I'm sure all of you guys turn everything off at 4 to 9, from 4 to 9, because but most people don't. So those are really peak times, and we've had to do this, but they have created this terrific open source computer model to help CCAs, which is what Peninsula Clean Energy is, and utilities purchase enough renewable energy to meet customer demand at all times, even as we electrify. So as the demand increases, they're still working on making sure that they can do this. Another thing that they do is helping customers use electricity when it's cleanest and most affordable. They're piloting an app. So this is hot off the press. It's still a pilot that will help you charge your EVs at optimal times based on real-time information from the grid. So I'm sure Peninsula Clean Energy will be telling us much more about that when they roll it out. So to the program. I don't have to spend a lot of time telling you all that bunches of people were left in the dark, literally, during these last set of storms. But it's not just the last set of storms. Grid reliability has been and is a problem, not just during disasters, but even non-disasters. As a matter of fact, our representative from PG&E, who was going to be here today, is not here because there's a major blackout in San Francisco. So it couldn't be timed better as far as a little bit of irony. I don't think it's probably great for the 8,000 people in San Francisco who don't have power, but it's just another example of what's really going on. Like, we do not have a fully reliable grid. And as we all want to electrify, this is important. So today we are going to have 4 terrific speakers. The first one is going to be Irma Rodriguez-Mitten, who's the Executive Director of South Coast Sustainable. It's really here not just to talk about that, but to talk about her experience as a Pescadero resident. Pescadero is part of our county. We have a very, very diverse county, and they have problems that are unique to the coast on the one hand. On the other hand, a lot of this stuff is stuff that happens to everyone in our county, especially these last 3 months. And then after that, we'll have Cristina Crespo Montañez, who's a researcher at UC Berkeley. I'm not going to read their whole resumes. We sent them out already, and so it's going to take too long to do that. I think you guys all know State Senator Josh Becker. He has been absolutely just a tremendous champion for the environment on the state level. He represents much of San Mateo County, as well as the northern part of Santa Clara County. And then we have Dr. Lian Min, who's from a Stanford program called Stanford Bits and Watts Initiative. He's managing director, and he'll be telling us much more about the initiative and what Stanford is working on. So with that, just for the program, we will have each speaker present, and then we're going to have a discussion, and there will be a lot of time for questions from you and from everyone who's on Zoom. So I will give it to Irma.
I'm going to adjust. Hopefully. Come on, Mike man. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for the opportunity, and thank you to Thrive for the opportunity to be here and provide some context from an unincorporated coastal perspective on what grid resiliency would mean for us. I'm going to try to do 3 things in the next 15 minutes, which is give you a little bit of background on myself and the impact this has on me as a person, but much more background on the South Coast communities, what it's like for us when the power goes out, not just this winter, but as Petra said, you know, it's been increasingly frequent over the past, say, 5 years or so. And the third thing is I'm going to ask you something, as this is a design challenge. I'm going to ask what we would like to solve for, from our perspective, what our communities would like you to solve for, you being the techno whizzes and the policymakers and just the activists in our communities. So a little bit about me is I've been involved in sustainable community development for about 15 years in green building and a variety of aspects. I worked for a major third-party implementer for energy efficiency programs, and for the past 3 years have been working with, among other agencies, the Office of Sustainability, to have conversations in my community about climate adaptation planning, about electrification and energy efficiency, and all of the barriers to those. So I have to start by acknowledging the fact that I dedicate so much time and energy to accelerating this just transition to a clean energy world, especially to finding solutions that benefit the most vulnerable people in my community. And on the other hand, I live in Pescadero. And like Val said, I'm not going to give up my propane and my generator until I can trust the grid, because there's reasons for that. So, so before launching into the more direct talk about this winter's storms, I want to give you some more context about this place that we call the South Coast. So on this slide has 2 images, right? The green, mostly empty rectangle there illustrates about 45 square miles of unincorporated San Mateo County. Now, this is not the whole unincorporated South Coast. That's much bigger than this. This is our dense area. These are our villages, our urban core, where we're mostly populated. And I wanted to contrast that with the image on the left, which is the city of Redwood City, this multicolored image that shows you all the neighborhoods of Redwood City. So if you look at that and you look at the population numbers, another caveat here, we know that the population numbers for the South Coast are vastly underreported. So that's why you see a range of 1,800 to 3,600 people, maybe 1,200 housing units, sort of. I could have gotten the exact number of electrical connections for both houses and units, but for comparison's sake, let's just use housing units. You can see Redwood City, 84,000 people across 32,000 housing units. So let's just look at keep that in mind as we're looking at numbers, okay? When there's a power outage, we all experience a lot of the same things, right? Whether it's a planned public safety power shut off or an unplanned because of storms, or even these weird blue sky events where we lose power on the coast just because, we all know power goes out. When power goes out for us, often all our communications go out. Internet and phone lines and cell lines. Even though there's supposed to be backup power for at least 24 hours on the cell towers, we found repeatedly over the years that that's not always the case. So we, and my husband Bob's here, thank you, Bob, for joining me. We actually, flashlights are always within arm's reach. Camping lanterns, battery operated candles, always within arm's reach. We became licensed ham radio operators because that's the only way you can communicate. And we are more frequently now, again, being called out by the La Honda Volunteer Fire Brigade to act as their emergency communication staff. So we relay information from our neighborhoods to the firehouse. They relay the information to the Department of Emergency Management. We relay information to each other, to neighbors. Is the gas station open? Who's got, which stores are open, which roads are closed. That kind of emergency communication is done by amateur radio, which seems like an old technology, but it's reliable. It gets us through. So beyond just the power, the electricity, and the communications, there's another thing that happens out in the coast, which doesn't necessarily happen in the urban neighborhoods, and that is our water systems. Most of us rely on individual wells for our properties or small water systems in La Honda and Loma Mar. So what does that mean? That means no dishwashing, no showers, no flushing toilets. If you live on a farm like we do, we hand carry water to all our farm animals. So we actually, this past year, put in another 1,500 gallon water storage tank. And we have about a dozen 55-gallon drums. So we have enough water to carry to livestock. And we always have on hand 15 gallons of filtered drinking water because we don't know if this power outage is going to be a few hours of inconvenience or a few days of inconvenience. To get to the experience of this winter, we had stretches of between 9 and 14 days without electricity. And we get electricity for a few hours. We rush to wash the dishes and refill all the tubs, get in our showers. And then I go to do a load of laundry and then power's out. Okay, no laundry. That's so fine. That's fine. We'll wait for the next time there's power. This wasn't just in January. We had this happen all through to the end of March. One of my neighbors actually calculated that about a quarter of the days between the beginning of the year and the end of March, his house experienced some sort of power outage, either partial days or full days. And so you can imagine the cumulative cost of all of that in spoiled food, in lost work for people who work from home or for our local retail businesses, all those lost days of customers, and the extra costs of the fuel to keep the generators going and replace all the food. So this is incredibly emotionally draining as well as financially draining for some of the least resourced people in our communities. So, and I have to also give a hat tip to the teachers. When this happens, the schools have some solar power, they have generators. The elementary school in La Honda relies on a water system that could not pump without power. So among their other duties, teachers are carrying buckets of water to flush the toilets for the kids. And you can say, well, why did you just cancel school? because that's the only place these kids have warmth and they get breakfast and lunch. So you got to keep the schools running. So we've got to have the generators. We have to have, wood stoves. We have to have our propane. So it goes again, on one hand, I'm working really hard to fight, to help people reduce their carbon footprint, to transition to all clean energy. And on the other hand, it's not a good position to be in to try to convince people to electrify when you know that they have to rely on propane and gas and diesel in order to survive. And even in our house, we kept our generator going maybe an hour a day, just enough to keep the batteries and the radios charged and our food kind of coldish. I didn't feel good about having it run all day. So, to one extent, we're really prepared. But here's another difference to consider between the South Coast and the image on the right, left, the Redwood City image. The very bottom of my slide is a table, and this is an aggregation of data based on different distances from my house in Pescadero, Loma Mar, La Honda, and San Gregorio, again, our core urban neighborhoods, and houses here in Redwood City, or this location in Redwood City, and also our former house up in Emerald Lake Hills near Sequoia Hospital. So, again, I'm trying to do an apples to apples comparison. When the power's out, what's the first place that you think about when you want to get to emergency services? Fire stations, right? So in Redwood City, you've got fire stations every couple miles. We have amazing first responders on the South Coast in the volunteer fire brigades and CAL FIRE. But we're still, if you live in San Gregorio, you're still at least 8 miles from a fire station to call for help. And the next step would be, do we need a community center, like an assistance center, a warming center, someplace where people can go for shelter and recharge their devices and stuff? Probably here and within Redwood City, you're within walking distance or public transport of that. Again, in the South Coast, you're at least 10 miles away. If your power is out for longer than 8 hours and you follow those guidelines that you should throw away the food in your fridge, again, after a couple times, you're like, I'm not replacing all the food in my fridge. Our local convenience stores, which are very small and not exactly affordable, they usually close by 6. If they're running on generator, they'll close by 6. So the nearest full service grocery store is, again, at least 10 miles away for most of us, maybe 20. And I say that because, again, we're looking at the cost of gas. You're not driving your EV if you don't know that you can recharge it. So that's another thing to consider. If someone needs care, this is the scariest part. And it's even scarier now that Highway 84 is damaged. It's at least an hour's drive. And that's an hour's drive on narrow, twisty roads, which if you've ever had a child who's got the flu, you do not want to drive to the hospital with. So all of this is very scary, but it's not, again, going back to the hope that Petra spoke about earlier, I know there are solutions because that's part of my job. I know there are solutions. I know we have the technology to fix this. I know we have the political will now to fix this. And fortunately, we also have some real dollars behind that will if they're spent correctly. What is the solution? Is it undergrounding for these communities? Is it community microgrids? If you look at, again, the Redwood City map, really, really easy to do undergrounding, to do community microgrids for a neighborhood because they're really self-contained. If you look at the South Coast map, actually we're pretty compact. We could do community microgrids in select areas around the core of Pescadero, around the core of La Honda, around the core of the little community of Butteno Canyon. They're actually ideal for that kind of stuff. The problem comes when we look at the financial models. In terms of actually rebuilding infrastructure, it's really a cost challenge. It's how do you make it make sense with traditional financial models? You know, undergrounding utilities is costly enough in a neighborhood where you can easily close off streets and you can reroute traffic and crews can get in, get their work done and get out. It's a lot more challenging, which means it's a lot more costly when you're trying to do it in an environment where all our roads are, you know, fairly narrow and the shoulders are usually drainage ditches. So you can't even pull the trucks off the road to let one-way traffic through. So not only is it dangerous for crews, but it's really, really disruptive because there's not always a good way to reroute traffic around the construction work. That all adds delays and that all adds cost. There's also layers and layers of environmental concerns that need to be mitigated and permitted. So, you know, we can't give up our generators and our propane yet, not even close. And so this is my final point. As we're designing solutions, we have to figure out a way to not look at it as a traditional cost benefit analysis. You're not going to get the ROI from a community microgrid that serves 80 people in Pescadero. It's not going to work that way. We have to find a different approach. So I hope that today and in subsequent conversations, we can remember that, you know, designing infrastructure for neighborhoods on the right side of this slide, it has to be very different than the communities on this left side of the slide. Whether it's utility scale or block scale, consider the costs it will take to upgrade our infrastructure, but also consider the cost that we will continue to incur if we don't. Thank you.
Irma, thank you very much. We really appreciate you bringing it down to the really local level and how it affects people locally. And for a more bird's eye view, again, with a lens on equity, I'm going to turn it over to Christina.
Great, thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen here. Great, I hope everyone is seeing my first slide here. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts, Irma. I'm going to talk about something similar in my presentation today. I am a PhD candidate at the University of California, Berkeley, and one of my projects looks at reliability events and how they change users' perspectives of energy transitions in homes. I will not be speaking about San Mateo County in particular, rather about the East Bay, but I think some of the thinking and questions and concerns that my interviewees are having are shared and were definitely picked up by Irma and perhaps in a more exacerbated way in Pescadero. So I wanted to start up with offering a vignette from one of my interviewees to set the tone. So I was speaking to this Oakland homeowner about how she had how she was sharing her thoughts. She was sharing her thoughts about how she lived through the 2019 public safety power shutoffs or PSPS events. These controlled outages that were precautionary measures taken by PG&E in this area to reduce the risk of wildfires. And so in 2019, 3 million Californians were affected by these outages. And in the aftermath of these outages, this interviewee had decided to install solar panels on her rooftop and a battery storage unit. And so she had also initially mentioned that she was unwilling to lose her gas connection, particularly that she wanted to be able to provide cooked meals to her children with a gas cook stove in case of a long duration power outage. And in this instance that I'm sharing here, she was sort of walking back on this last point, saying, as she explained, she understood the idea of remaining hooked on to gas and as antithetical to the green stewardship that she had, but at the same time felt that like shark attacks, she had not experienced power shutoff, but was already sort of conditioning her response to energy transitions in her homes based on the fear of these power shutoffs. So what I want to bring out with this quote is that this is not an isolated case, that fears of power loss and the realities of power loss are becoming more pervasive, not least because, as many of the people in this room know, the unreliability events in California are on the rise. Just a few weeks ago, after the latest winter storms, Sumit Singh, PG&E's Vice President of Operations, recognized that the storm was the most impactful, and I quote, the most impactful storm that we have seen in terms of customers out of in a single day in the Bay Area since 1995. And so what I'm trying to bring together in this presentation, what I'm studying with this project is how this increasingly unreliable grid in the state of California is in effect relying on, in turn, on its customers and homeowners to meet its mitigation objectives, which combine the decarbonization of electricity supply with the widespread electrification of energy demand. And so to this, there's compounded the fact that Californians already pay among the highest prices of electricity in the nation, and that there are projected increases to electricity bills as utilities address wildfire risk, required upgrades to aging infrastructure or investments for infrastructural redundancies, and the fear of more frequent outages that can disincentivize homes from increasing their electricity dependence, as Irma was a case of that explained. So I just want to make sure that we have like a visual of what residential electrification looks like and what the changes that sort of the state is again relying on homes to do. This, I think, this image is quite synthetical to explain what a version of a fossil fuel power home looks like versus what an electrified home looks like. Sort of summarizes the suite of technologies that go into a fully electrified home. And the realities of sort of the social technical energy transitions that have to take place in these homes look a bit different and less stylized than this image. Not everyone can participate or will be impacted in the same way by electrification. And this depends obviously on socioeconomic conditions, housing tenure, cultural preferences, and the energy efficiency of the buildings they inhabit. But this affordability concerns and tenure concerns, there's also this part of the fear of outages or the realities of the lived experience of outages that complicate this idea of electrification. So what I've been thinking about and bringing together with the interviews that I've been conducting is this idea about the social dimensions of reliability. So reliability receives little attention when we think about energy transitions, because in many places in California or the US, it has not been considered a key question in energy transitions. Affordability is typically seen as a barrier, and sustainability as the objective of transitions, but reliability is sort of taken for granted. And the reality is that beyond the technical definitions of reliability and the realities of events happening in an area or in another, there are also social dimensions to grid reliability, where we look at how people are thinking a system can be trusted to work in ways that meet expectations. And reliability events, even if technically they only concern certain circuits or generators, from a social perspective, they are not necessarily constrained to a certain area. People that have not suffered a reliability event can still have a fear of it and can still change their perception about electrifying or transitioning to other sources of power instead of being reliant on gas or purchasing a generator, even if they've not felt the outage themselves, but rather have a fear of experiencing power loss. So what we're looking at is trying to sort of dispel some of the implications of this social dimensions of reliability and bringing together some of these experiences from the user perspective. So just very briefly, what we're doing is conducting semi-structured interviews across the East Bay, and which is an area which has definitely received less power shutoffs or less frequent than some of the places that have been talked about in the previous presentation, but has a high degree of residential solar adoption, extensive electrification efforts, significant economic inequality, and heightened vulnerabilities to heat and wildfire-induced power disconnections, now also storm events in the past few months. And so let me make a couple of points of how I've been seeing people think about reliability and how it interacts with energy transitions. So here, this interviewee was telling me about how they had realized sort of what parts of the grid felt safe and did not feel safe. They were saying, I'm going to quote here, yeah, we've never actually lost power. I think I have no idea if this is true or not, but we live really close to this hospital. So I feel I've never actually seen that happen, but it is something that I've thought about and worried about. So interviews has been a recurrent messaging from interviewees that are becoming more aware of the sort of spatial unevenness of the distribution of disconnections, even within quite a small urban area like the East Bay is. And they've commented on how outages sort of divide space between those in the hills or lightly populated areas versus the urban cores, or specifically protected circuits like the hospital circuits. And sort of these realizations modify how protected users are feeling about unreliability phenomenon and how much of a sort of political capital they're willing to put into improving reliability for all, or deciding to take measures in their own hands. And this is also something that has been definitely very changing from those who feel that they're vulnerable to these disconnections, to these power shutoffs, and those who don't. In response to some of these events, households are definitely more increasingly skeptical of PG&E's ability to provide reliable service. This is definitely something that the majority of interviewees are expressing. And there's also sort of a historic accumulation of events, including the Paradise Fire and the San Bruno explosion, that are sort of current themes that come up in the interviews as evidence of the untrustworthiness of PG&E to provide secure power and safe power, and now reliable power. And so instead, many households envision or actively act on the idea of being energy sufficient or independent from PG&E. And so here in this case, the interview was talking to me about how during the wildfires, even though they did not have air conditioning, they did have plug-in air filters, which they needed at that moment, and they did not lose power during the wildfires, but they were concerned that they would or could see themselves in a situation where they would have no air filters and kids in the house. And so in response, they added a battery to the PV installation they had in their home. And that was part of the reasoning for that battery backup. And one of the recurring themes again that has come up in the experience of outages is this reliance on being able to either plug in these air filters, because in the East Bay, people have tended to sort of correlate possibility of outages and wildfire season on very hot days, which has been sort of the majority of the experience of outages in that area. And definitely also the idea of being able to cook whatever happens. So the idea of electrifying the cook stove is definitely something that folks are not only have culturally specific concerns about electric cooking, and gas stoves sort of links to the image of soft domesticity and what is natural to be used as cooking, but also have this concern of will I be able to cook during an outage event. Many people were definitely willing to keep the cook stove for last in terms of electrification. And so this is definitely one of the possibilities as a response to increasing outages, this idea of including battery backup power and the solar installation. But well, these ideas are sometimes acted upon like this, or typically articulated by most of the interviewees for these ideas of sort of Tesla power wall packs and solar rooftop. The price tag of some of these items can also sometimes convert these ideas of self-sufficiency from solar plus storage to the purchase of diesel-powered backup generators. And these were definitely something that were maybe not as widespread as some of the areas that Irma was talking about in the past in the East Bay, but the installation of which has dramatically increased in the areas of the interviews that I've been talking to. Many people in the Oakland and Berkeley Hills have resorted to this. In Castro Valley, also an area where it got actually really, really hot when at the time where the outages were happening a couple of years ago. many folks had to flee their homes, and others talked about how they had, in this case, many of the neighbors had generators and they could even hear them buzzing at the time of these outages. And so this sort of ramification of this response to reliability definitely goes in opposition to some of these images of sustainable energy independence that people articulate, but of course, not necessarily everyone can afford. And so I wanted to share just some reflections of, I was invited to talk about the problem, and I'm very willing to think about solutions together, but some reflections or some of the ramifications of not considering these social aspects of reliability. So these social aspects of reliability are receiving little consideration when we're thinking about energy transitions, particularly electrification, despite us speaking in areas that are definitely under big pressures to electrify, and correctly so, but these aspects of reliability have to be integrated as we see this in this increasingly disrupted climate and increasingly unreliable grid system. The sort of the risk of not doing so, of misrecognizing how people have lived through unreliability events or the fear of them, can play against our ideals of mitigation and electrification. It leads us to believe that given sufficient access to information on the sustainability implications of electrification, and once the affordability barriers for the purchase of heat pumps or EVs are dealt with, users will indeed choose to electrify, irrespective of what increasing their dependence on the electric grid implies for the provision of their energy services, which they're looking for. And finally, this sort of atomization of users' responses to unreliability. Many people spoke maybe about going to see neighbors or some sort of ad hoc community responses in neighbors that had a backup power or had a generator. But most of the responses that people had to these events were individual, and in some cases certainly exacerbate air pollution and hamper climate mitigation strategies otherwise, when in the case of purchasing fossil fuel generation. So these sort of responses, and more worryingly, sort of fracture and individualize the response and contribute sort of to this vicious cycle of decreased expectations for electric service, grid defection, perhaps in the case of just purchasing solar and batteries. And with that sort of individual response to unreliability events, take away sort of the political capital to demand better centralized services and better grid reliability, which can leads to this sort of lesser ratepayers funding for a lower quality electric service. So I guess this behooves the question again: reliability for whom and electrification for whom, and how do those intersect? I hope this was not too much of a demotivating presentation. I was here to set up for the problem. I am very willing to have a conversation on solutions to some of the community responses that are starting to spark around different areas, and I'm happy to join the conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate how you're bringing up the questions of equity, and also of how the inequity leads to changes in political power, right? Because if the people who have the most political power can just buy their Tesla Powerwalls and their solar systems and are totally off the grid and they don't have to worry about it, that makes less pressure.
Mm-hmm. And I definitely want
for everyone.
That the message is not that that people should not be doing that. It is definitely understandable, the response that they're taking, but how can we think and integrate these responses towards a community responses, right, and to system planning?
Exactly. I do want to thank you, because now I'm always going to be thinking of sharks when I'm anyway. Appreciate that. Our next speaker, now we're moving on to solutions. So our next speaker, is he queued up? Are we ready? Is State Senator Josh Becker, if he's ready to go.
Hey, everyone.
I hear him.
Yeah, I'm pulled over, and so hopefully this will go smoothly. We've got Helen here with some slides, and I know this is a well-versed audience, and including several award winners recently, Sustainable San Mateo County Award winners. So it was quite a well-versed audience, but thought we'd go through a little bit. Tell me, if we're getting sure where you want to go, I understand that the focus is, I think, kind of on a sustainable grid, which could mean a couple things. So, sustainable in terms of the inputs to the grid, but also the grid itself, being sustainable. So if you can see the slides here, well, you can go to the first slide that you've probably seen me use, which is we're the first generation to feel the effect of climate change, the last generation who can do something about it. So good reminder for us all on what we're doing here. Next slide. So this talks a little about the progress and so we know growing our economy 60% while lowering emissions by 20%. Next slide. But it gets a lot harder from here. So it gives you some sense of what we need to do just to hit our 2030 goals. We need to be reducing about 5% a year, reducing closer to 1% a year. Next slide. And the emissions come from all over. A lot of that transportation, obviously about 50%, but now we're in the process of electrifying transportation and electrifying buildings. So the amount attributable to the grid will go up, and that is the imperative to green the grid. It's about 16% is from electricity. Today, the grid is about half clean, 55%, and so we got to get it 100% clean, but we also need to, well, at the same time, we're adding a ton of load. Next slide. We did set some interim goals on the way to 100% clean energy. And some of I've been very focused on 24/7 clean energy because we have to really focus on the peak. Solar, during the day is now the cheapest thing to build, and energy is getting to be virtually free at that time. And so the question is, how do we really attack the peak? And we have a 60% clean energy target, 60% renewable by 2030. And we've always hit these renewable portfolio targets. But felt we really needed some interim goals. We had nothing else for the other 40% of how we were going to get to 100%. So that's the part that I've been tackling here, and it got folded into a Senate bill last year and 1020, and we've got that in law now. Next slide. So this is kind of an overall strategy side about cleaning the grid, electricity, low carbon fuels, carbon capture, touching some methane and high global warming potential gases, and then carbon removal, which we're also working on this year. Next slide. And it's a golden age of clean energy. So we've there's massive numbers of new models of EVs coming out. We're adding tons of battery storage, solar, wind. I was working on offshore wind today, which is still going to take time, but this is really the golden age of clean energy. Next slide. So again, we've done the goal setting, but also the detailed enabling legislation about meeting our goals in all these areas. Next slide. I did want to talk specifically of the grid. I mean, my subcommittee, so right now that I chair budget sub 2, so that's energy and resources, climate, all this. So we obviously think a lot about this, including wildfire risk, and part of that's undergrounding. And McGuire had a bill last year. McGuire's also, the subcommittee is only 3 people. It's me, McGuire, and then Brian Dolly, who's obviously Republican, but cares deeply about a lot of these issues, especially wildfire. And we spent a lot of time talking about this undergrounding at the last meeting. Next slide. So solar canopies is part of greening the grid, and we also, part of this bill, we ended up doing 2 things, which were also allowing for the use of along the right of ways along highways for clean energy infrastructure, as well as for a transmission itself. So that's one of our pieces we're excited about. Next slide. And then this really gets to the heart of the issue of interconnection. I tried to tackle it my very first year with SB 68, and that part sort of got stripped out. And so we're back again, and now there's like 10 bills on this because people are just, it's gotten a crisis perspective of can we actually get things connected to the grid? And so I think this bill that we're doing this year, I think will sort of be the bill because it's sort of the most comprehensive, kind of thoughtful bill. It brings in labor as partners in this effort because they need to hire up a lot more people, and they want the surety that the work is going to the work is going to be there. And happy to talk more about that. But this is one of the critical issues this year. Next slide. A one-stop shop for transmission. We are trying to, again, we can build lots more renewable energy, but a lot of it's being built in far-flung parts of the state. And if we can't get it to where it needs to be, where the load is, then it's not going to help. So we just have to build a lot more transmission. And this is one of the pieces for me to do that. So I think, when we think about the grid broadly, it's a couple things. It's adding as much renewable generation as possible. We estimate we need 100 gigawatts of solar, which is 3 times as much solar we have today. It means really tackling the peak, and obviously I've had a lot of legislation focus on that. And we're fortunate to have Peninsula Clean Energy as the leader in the country on 24/7 clean energy, and people are just sort of still waking up to what that really means. And my hourly counting bill from last year, the sort of wonky bill that will kick in 2026, is going to start to make this super clear to people what the needs are around 24/7 clean energy. So that's really the second thing we need. The third thing we need is to tackle the transmission. And really the fourth thing we need is just to make sure we have the workforce and that the IOUs are on the hook to actually connect things to the grid, as well as making sure that the grid itself doesn't burn down more forests and kill more people. And so obviously that's something we're working on as well. So I'd say those are sort of 4 or 5 key parts that we think about. We may have a couple of slides here just about some other things we're doing. If you want to go to the next slide. This was our Ought to Be a Law winner, and when she was up last May, she's amazing, PhD at Stanford, who is helping us with this one-stop shop. This was her idea. And as we know, it's great that there's state and federal incentives and some local incentives, but it's just very confusing to people. So that's the goal of this effort here with CLEAR. And so we're very excited about that. Next slide. We've got the scoping plan, and that's other, all the other stuff that's going on here, at the same time, and want to just really commend heroic efforts by the folks at the Bay Area Air Quality Management District to pass the phase out of new gas furnaces and gas electrical hot water heaters. And that's awesome. And, now my role is to make sure that people actually have confidence in the grid. And it did have the COPG&E in my office, and I actually do think they're making progress. And they're doing a lot of things that need to get done, but they got to be doing much faster, and we got to hold them accountable. But it was at least a hopeful conversation. I think that we're moving in the right direction. Next slide. There you have it. I know you all know this, that we all have to work together to save it. And with that, let me know if you want to take any questions or move on with the program.
Can you stay on for a couple of minutes for questions?
I can, yeah.
Okay, I know there were a few questions in the chat, and I think there are a few questions in the room first, so we'll go back and forth. So first we'll do, we still have one more speaker, so we'll keep this brief, but I think we'll take advantage of having Senator Becker on the line. So I need to give you a microphone because otherwise the people on Zoom can't hear you, including Senator Becker. So introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Hi, Senator Becker. It's Jen Wallison from Menlo Park. You mentioned 4 things we need. I was trying to note what those were again. Can you kind of outline that for us so we can easily have that?
Yeah, I'd say, yeah, so I'd say number one, it's renewable, just ramping up renewables as fast as possible. At all levels, in all forms, whether it be onshore wind, offshore wind, community solar, rooftop solar, which obviously is taking a hit here, and utility scale solar. Number one. Number two is really tackling the peak. So figuring out what resources are going to, with batteries plus geothermal plus offshore wind, to really tackle that 4 to 9 p.m. Peak, where that's where we're still using, tons of greenhouse gases. And again, this will become apparent with my bill that we put in place, but, really getting folks to follow PG&E's lead and move to 24/7 clean energy. So that's really the second part is the peak. The third part is the transmission, so that we can actually get the energy from where it's produced to the urban load centers. And then, the fourth is just sort of the safety of the grid itself. Well, I'd say both. You could say 4 sort of interconnection, right? Which is sort of the what I was referring to, the bill I'm working on, which is actually getting things plugged into the grid and making sure that we hold the IOUs accountable to actually plugging things in, whether that be a home energy unit and a home energy electrical upgrade. Although thank you for the work here to show that, not as much upgrades are needed as people think, but there's still work we need them to do, as well as the big hospitals and big housing projects that need to get hooked up. So there's both those interconnection projects. And then that other part I just mentioned. So, 4/5 things that we need to do. The fifth was sort of being the undergrounding and other things to, make sure the grid doesn't, burn down more forests and have horrible effects with wildfires.
I saw a bunch of people taking pictures of the screen. Just so you know, we will send out all of the slides and the recording after this so that you don't have to try to furiously take notes. We're going to take one question now from Zoom, although I don't really like rewarding the people who don't come physically, but we will still we're going to have Tracy read one of the questions from Zoom. It's climate friendly, but it's not friendly.
Okay, our first question, or our only question from Ivana Andrade: does the bill address NIO's IOU's obligation to serve? This has been a major barrier in thinking through and approaching zonal electrification in partnership with PG&E.
I'd have to make sure I'm in alignment. Dave Min has a bill this year, which is passed in Energy Committee, which looks at how do we shut down parts of the grid, right? So like rather than having keep gas infrastructure going to every part of the grid for one home, how can we focus on a zonal approach there, so that we can start turning off parts of the gas grid? It got watered down in energy, but it's still a good bill with a lot of pilots around that. So I think that's, I would think, partly getting at your question, but happy to answer more. I think we did, and the governor helped with this too. There was actually a preference. We actually, we previously we charged all ratepayers to hook up gas lines to every new home, and we've gotten rid of that subsidy for gas for new hookups. But hopefully that answers part of your question.
Thank you, Senator.
Hi, I'm Mark Bruce, the Sustainable Energy Inc. And this morning I was in a workshop with the EPA. They've got a challenge and a transmission challenge going, and they had a workshop on that today. I've got a bunch of things I didn't get to tell them, but I think it'd be good to talk with you about them. They include undergrounding with ultra high performance conduit that is vaults that are made with 3D printing. It includes near room temperature superconducting and a bunch of other things, batteries and solar. So I'd like to talk with you about that later.
Yeah, sorry, these are ideas for undergrounding, for speeding.
Undergrounding and other transmissions. So they're looking at how can we do HVDC, and
yeah,
and those are all ideas that may have, one of the things they were focused on was doing it within the existing rights of way, but also extending the HVDC beyond where it is so far. And that could apply to California too, and we might be able to get some funding from EPA for California projects.
Yeah, happy to discuss. And one thing, when I was talking to PG, she committed is really focus on innovation, especially innovation from this area, and really open it up. Now that's an easier thing to said than done for big bureaucracy, but really open it up for innovation. So there's hope there as well.
Thank you, Senator Becker. If you can stay on, that would be great. If you can't, I totally understand, because I know you just came from a committee hearing and probably are rushing off to do more things. But I'm going to introduce our next speaker. Thank you so much for being with us and for the work you do, and we will see you next time.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, and our final speaker, those were legislative solutions. Now we're going to talk more general solutions. So Dr. Lian Min from Stanford Bits and Watts Initiative.
Sure, thanks for having me. I cannot see anything from the screen. And okay. Next one. Can everybody on Zoom see my slide? Okay. No worry. I mean, you put me on the solution side. I hope I have a magical wand to solve this problem, but let's try. Based on what I heard from the previous speakers, what I'm trying to talk about is equitable and smart infrastructure investment. I will talk about two things. One is from the mitigation perspective. We heard a lot regarding the undergrounding. Another from the adaptation side. If we cannot underground to the goal we want to, what's the solution? How do we do that? And the first, I want to give you next slide, please. Okay. Then I don't need to stand here. The first message I want to give to everybody, the climate change is real. Okay. That's the statistical data regarding the climate-induced natural disasters like drought, fires, flooding, etc. happened between 1980 to 2000 and between 2001 to now. The last 20 years, last 40 years, the comparison. Okay, so the key message is one, 80% increase in climate-induced natural disasters in last 20 years compared to 20 years before 20 years. It's increase. Okay, then let's zoom in. Next slide, please. Into our local problem. Everybody talk about the fire, and actually California, this area have more natural disasters, more than just the fire issues, right? But with today's topic regarding keep the power on, and also the how we invest on the infrastructure, I want to talk a little bit about the wildfire relationship with the utility. Okay, that's both sides. The first is the fire is a threat to the utility infrastructure. And by seeing that on this picture, you can see how the wood pole are burned by the fires. And on the flip side, utility infrastructure, especially our aging infrastructure, the aging transformer, the lines, is a threat because that's ignition source for the wildfire events in California. Okay. And this picture shows you the last almost 90 years statistics regarding the area burned by the power line ignited wildfire in California. Okay. And red means the highest one, blue is the lowest one. So you can see like Southern California, especially San Diego area, is more vulnerable to the utility ignited wildfire issues, right? And also along the Central California, etc. But the question to us is how can we protect and defend our urban grid from the wildfire scenes? So we have to understand what's the vulnerability for our infrastructure facing to the fire issues. But the majority of utilities do not have this information in the public domain. You don't know in a very holistic way where your infrastructure are and what's the vulnerability for your transmission and distribution line to the wildfire events, etc. Right? So the technology we did, next slide, please. How many of you drive your car here today use a Google map? All of you, right? So what do we do? Most of you. What we use is use Google Map. You can, from the top, has a satellite image, right? Use a street view. I did because there's a lot of building here. I want to understand it. From street view, you can see what the actual building would look like. Okay. What we use the technology AI to have the top down and also the street view map out all the infrastructure, electricity infrastructure in the state of California. Every single line. And we identify what is underground, what is above the ground. Okay. Then we correlate this information. This is what we call the asset risk. Okay. PG&E asset or Southern California or others. And then we have the vegetation risk. You talk about the tree canopy, etc. And we have a historical fire events, right? And we correlate these three things together to help us identify the most vulnerable electrical grid in the states. Okay. Then let's step back a little bit. We talk about, we need to understand which line has already been underground, right? We use the street view data and the satellite image show us this is the undergrounding rate for the state of California. The dark means the highest undergrounding rate, and the light, whatever purple or blue, the lowest undergrounding rate. So basically you can see PG&E area, we have an average about 25% undergrounding rate, okay? SDG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric is about 60%. In the US, average is about 20 or 25%. So PG&E is okay, not that bad. But we compare with other developed countries, like European countries, average is about 40%. Okay, so since we need underground, but do we need underground every line? Because it costs a lot of money. You read the news, every mile is average about $3 to $5 million. And the PG&E proposed about around 10,000 miles. That's about $30 to $50 billion. Do we need to? Probably yes, but next slide, please. But there's a huge equity issues if we don't choose the right undergrounding strategy. Okay, here's the data, because we have the previous information regarding, we can map out all the lines, right? Then we correlate this information with the census district information. This is one of them, which is the median house income for the x-axis, okay? Then we pick 4 information. One is undergrounding rate, which is up, right or left, up left corner on your side. And the second, for the area which not underground, that's not bad. Overhead transmission line, distribution line is okay. But how close for this overhead line to the trees? The fraction of the line to the trees. That's the second picture on the upper right one. And the third picture is the aging of the transformer. That's ignition source for the fire, right? The last picture here is the ratio of the wood poles. Okay, we correlate this information. So what's the information you learned here? So low income community has the lowest rate of undergrounding, has the highest fraction of overhead line proximate to the tree, okay? Has the most aging infrastructure, has a high fraction of a wood pole. That's across the whole state of California. We use AI and correlate all the information together. Next slide, please. The next question, how do we solve this issue? What's the status quo regarding policy and methodology, right? Right now, if you go to PUC, I saw some PUC members online, right? If you go to PUC, there are the Rule 20 and the subcategory Rule 20 A, B, C, D. Here I only show A, B, C because 20B apply only to San Diego gas electric area, which we call the high wildfire threat rate rule structure, right? But the difference between 20A and 20BC are the following. So Rule 20A is we call the general cost sharing. For instance, if you want underground one line in Palo Alto, let's say this way, everyone in PG&E footprint will pay for it, including East Palo Alto folks. The second one is Rule 20B and the C, which is partially or fully paid by local people who get the benefits of this underground line. Then this is introduced another very interesting equity issue. If I want to underground the line in, let's say like Orlando or Palo Alto, relatively rich area or very rich area, everybody in the PG&E area need to pay for it. On opposite scenarios, if I use the 20B or 20C, if I want to underground one in the East Palo Alto, if I use local, only East Palo Alto people pay for it. What's the rule should we adopt? There will be a huge debate issue, right? But whether or not we can introduce something, be more strategical and optimized way to solve this equity problem. Next slide. So here you see 5 slides. What we introduce is a income threshold, median income threshold. Okay. For the far left and the far right is we use a no threshold, basically. Then we use a local cost sharing and the general cost sharing, okay? And the y-axis is annual undergrounding cost as a share of the household income percentile, okay? Then by seeing that whatever is low cost sharing and the general cost sharing, low income communities will pay the highest rate of their annual house income to undergrounding. And the second, we introduce the threshold, 50K for the median income. Basically, above the 50K, we use a local method. Below 50K in the area, we use the general cost sharing method, right? And that's the second and the fourth one. So the conclusion is we should introduce a threshold, which is 100K, then you will see a very equal distribution. Okay, next slide. This is a mitigation. As I said, it's very expensive, right? But another one is really adaptation. So here is another optimization and the AI algorithm we used for the whole country, not just, we have zoom in for California. So what we did is we got the data from National Renewable Energy Lab, NREL, is about a couple million household, 87, 60 hours energy consumption to the appliance level. And we do optimization. We put an objective, which is have energy combination be able to survive for 1 day outage. We give them 3 resources to do that. One is diesel, one is PV, a third one is battery, right? And then each county has different electricity rate, and each area has different cost for different type of technology. You know, here's is output. Basically, for California, solar plus battery, you know, be able to support us for 1 day outage. In certain areas like Texas and other areas, they will heavily rely on diesel because diesel is the electricity rate is very low and diesel is relatively cheap, right? It makes sense. But in California, PV plus storage, it's a solution, okay? But how much will it cost? This is the number is per daily a kilowatt hour. No, let me change this formula a little bit. The average household in the United States daily energy consumption is about 30 kilowatt hours. right? So if you time this number, 128 watt times 30, it's about 7.2 kilowatt solar. 7.2 kilowatt solar system. The solar cost right now is about $3 per watt. Okay, so that's about, I'm sorry, 4 point times 3 is 4.2, the 3.6, sorry, 3.6. Let's use the 4 kilowatt system. 4 kilowatt system, $3 per watt. So it's about $12,000 solar, okay? Then this number is the same thing, 240 watts per daily kilowatt hour. If times 30, so we talk about 7.2 kilowatt hour battery system, almost like half of the Tesla Powerwall. Tesla Powerwall, if one Powerwall right now is cost about $9,000, close to $10,000, right? It's about $5,000. So we talk about $5,000 for battery plus another maybe $10,000 for solar. We can support majority of the California sustain for 1 day outage. That's before tax incentive, because right now government introduced so-called ERA, Inflation Reduction Act, right? 30% solar and the battery storage, each of them will have tax credit on top of that. So 15,000 to reduce 30%, roughly about $10,000. We can have this system ready. Now, how many electricity customers in the state of California? How many electricity customers in the state of California? 3 million, $3.3 million, 3.3 million. 3.3 million times $10,000 for each of them. You do the math. $33 billion, right? You remember the number we talked about undergrounding? It's $30 to $50 billion. Great. So you have a complete different way to solve this problem. One is mitigation, one is adaptation. Okay, so we have a formula on the table. Then we need technologies here. Then I can even bring down this cost. Next slide. So, because this is average price. If you go to California ISO right now, the state we call the locational marginal price is around $37 per megawatt hour, right? But the peak cap for California, we talk about ramping events for the Senator Josh Baker. The cap is $2,000, which means that in a very hot summer day, highly congested scenarios, is very expensive, right? So what we can do is really link all the distributed energy resources the customer will have, or maybe customer already have, link them together, offer the flexibility to the grid, solve the late afternoon we call the dark curve, because we have very fast ramping events. The sun goes down, the customer consumption goes up. Use the customer's resources, help the grid. But the customer have to get paid. By doing that, we create a scenario which is a win-win case. Which means that customer will get paid for the resource they deployed. The win for the utility or the society is solve the ramping issue for the late afternoon. By doing that, you can even further down, bring down the $10,000 or $15,000 investment for the solar plus storage solutions. So that's what we did for the last 5 years. So we call the power net. The idea is you network all the power resources behind the meter and offer the flexibility to the grid. Next slide, please. So we have a prototype or demonstration sites. One is inside Stanford. We have my lab called the Bits and Watts lab. And in the Fremont, we deployed in Fremont about 35 houses. Each of house, we give them a battery storage, and they have solar, and they give us control of air conditioners. And we network them together and bid into the California ISO. And then also in Central California, we have a very large dairy farm. And because their electricity bill is very high. And we help them install the solar PV to offset the summer peak, but also introduce the frequency control for the fan and give the battery to back up, etc. Be able to reduce the bill almost 80%. for the electricity bill. So we haven't, for that one, we haven't even backfeed to the California ISO. What I'm trying to say is we need to create a win-win case for the customer and also for the grid. My last slide, please. I mean, I want to conclude one thing is, we know we will have more renewables for sure. Everybody love it, right? But renewable is not the magical one. Okay, if we love renewables, we have to love transmission. I think that Senator Josh Baker mentioned, you mentioned that. We have to love transmission because we have to have a very cheap, clean electricity generated somewhere like offshore wind, right? Offshore wind in California, Humboldt Bay is a very rich area, but that's not a load center. Load center here, California. How do you transmit from Humboldt Bay to here, right? And we're working on technology, which is a submarine cable, because it's very hard to build transmission line in this country, right? Not in my backyard. And we need more storage because natural gas system has a natural storage capability, but sun and solar and wind, they cannot be stored, right? Electron cannot be stored. We need to have a storage capability. Last, but also very important is we need to empower the customer, really engage the customer, create a win-win case for the customer and the utility. We don't want a scenario that I hate the utility. The bill is going high and I also experience more and more outage. How can we create a win-win case, be able to leverage the third-party investment, which you and we have, right? And be offered the capability and flexibility back to the grid. Okay, I think I talked probably longer than I expected.
Actually, all of the speakers went longer than they were supposed to, but because there's a lot of content and it's really interesting. But I would love it actually if we still have the two of the speakers in the room. If there are any questions, either in the room or on chat, we have a couple more minutes. No, and Chris is also on the line, and I think Helen Walter is also on chat. So if anybody has questions for any of the speakers, because I certainly do. All right, well, I'm going to take the privilege of the microphone. So what I actually wanted to ask you, as you were talking about this, is what do you see as new technological breakthroughs that are starting to come that you might know about, that we haven't heard about, that would give us some hope and optimism about storage or transmission or anything?
I'll talk about one that I love, that like I get to do cool tours. We have a ton of startups in town, which I hope this was okay jumping in. Sometimes I can't tell. But Mainspring in Menlo Park is this little startup. The founder, she was working on her PhD at Stanford, and they it's kind of like you can Google them, and and as a public servant, we have no. I'm not, there are lots of cool companies out there. And this one just really came to mind because of the grid resiliency. And they can they can help communities who don't have batteries and don't want to use diesel generators, switch to other types of fuel that are cleaner. And it's like a microgrid, but and it's just a really innovative system. Instead of using a diesel generator, they use clean fuel, and it uses all sorts of different fuels. And you can microgrid for, on the coast is what I've thought it would work well for. No one's bitten when I've suggested that yet, but I think it's, I love that idea that it's a clean to help transition communities and off of fossil fuels. So I wanted to draw attention to that cool startup.
Thank you, Helen. Dr. Min, do you have anything you want to share too?
I mean, I mentioned all the things. I think for transmission, I don't think this is a technology issue. This is more policy, political, and coordination issues, right? And from technology side, I think definitely long duration energy storage is a very promising area that people should look into, because I didn't bring that chart because another chart I want to talk about is really the relationship between the renewable penetration level with the duration of energy storage. Right now in California, we're about 40% energy coming from renewables, from clean energy variable generation. Let me call it this way, wind and the solar. If we go to Germany and the others, probably about 40, 45 or 50%. That's a sweet spot for 2 to 4 hour battery storage. That's why we see a lot of 2 to 4 hour lithium battery deployed in California or everywhere. But when we go beyond to 60%, 80%, we need a week-long, multi-day energy storage technology that has to be cheap, affordable. So in near term means like next 5 or 10 years, we need a very affordable, large scale, long duration energy storage, more than just pump hydro. We know pump hydro is proved technology, right? But pump hydro cannot be built everywhere. I mean, I think that's one. If we go a little bit long term, I think is a hydrogen is another very promising area, because that's a, we talk a lot about electron, but every ultimate goal is decarbonization, right? Decarbonize can decarbonize molecule and can decarbonize electron, right? So because certain sectors like industrial sector, it's very hard to be electrified 100%. We talk about transportation. In California, light duty vehicle 100%, medium duty 100%, heavy duty, maybe hydrogen can play some role, right? But in industrial sectors, how the hydrogen, the green hydrogen, that's another, maybe not after 10 years, really scale. DOE has a goal called $1, 1 kilogram in 10 years. That's a goal for green hydrogen for the United States. I mean, I can go further along, like after 2050, right? We need to really think about direct air capture, because we talk about clean electricity. 80% clean electricity by 2030 or 2035 is very achievable, but go beyond that will be extremely expensive, right? But how do you introduce technology like direct air capture and others to kill the last percentile, 10 percentile? Yeah, it will be like very long time. It's a timeline, 5 years, long duration, 10, 20, green hydrogen. Beyond that, direct air capture and even small module reactors and even fusion energies, will be very interesting technology.
Thank you. We are over time, so I'm going to let all of the people on Zoom go because we're going to keep chatting here. But we hope to see you at our next event for this group, the Environment Sustainability, any of our next Thrive events. And in October, we'll have our big climate summit again. So looking forward to seeing you all many times before then. And thank you so much to our fantastic speakers. This was really, really an opportunity to learn a lot. So thank you, Irma, Josh, and Helen, Christina, and Dr. Min. We appreciate having you all here. So let's give them a big round of applause. And we will see everybody soon. Thank you.